Most viewers here May silver delivery attention pulls toward real-world premium explanations and assume the story is obvious. It isn't. The quoted spot price and the real regional bid are not saying the same thing, and that spread is where the useful signal hides. This setup matters because two silver prices before May, why Dubai shows $91 while COMEX prints $73, is not just a headline story. It can change the math for two faster than most holders expect. Stay with me, because the key signal is not the loudest one. It is the one that changes what happens next. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which signal matters most and what it means for your next move. And I'll translate it into what it means for a real stacker, not just another macro recap. Here is the clean way to think about it. COMEX and LBMA sit at the center of price discovery, but the center is not the whole market. A futures-linked quote can stay calm because it reflects paper positioning, financing, contract structure, a metal that exists somewhere in the system. Here's what this means if you're stacking silver right now. Here's what this means if you're stacking silver right now. A physical quote in Dubai reflects something stricter. Metal in the right place, in the right form, available on the right timeline. For a buyer who wants it now, for your physical metals position, this changes the math entirely. Those are not identical products, and when timing tightens, they do not clear at identical prices. That is LBMA's two-price silver problem in plain English. The benchmark says one thing, the real-world replacement market says another, and the gap matters most right before a month that pulls attention back toward delivery. Think about two buyers standing in front of the same headline spot quote. One is fine with financial exposure and plans to trade around a benchmark. The other wants bars that can actually be sourced, moved, and settled. On paper, they are both buying silver. In practice, they are buying different combinations of certainty, timing, and location. The first buyer is purchasing price exposure. The second buyer is purchasing metal plus immediacy. When the market is relaxed, those can look almost identical. When the market tightens, immediacy stops being free. That is when a physical hub starts printing the more painful number, and that is exactly why a real stacker has to watch beyond the chart. Now look at the size of the mismatch. What does this mean for stackers? Here's the real number. Hedge, a move from $73 to $91 is about a 24.7% difference. In a market as liquid and globally watched as silver, that is not background noise. You can explain a small spread with fabrication, freight, or local taxes. You do not explain away a gap that large without admitting that urgency, location, and availability are doing real work. That is the first proof beat. The number itself tells you this is not just a chart story. And if you are trying to buy physical silver instead of admire spot on a screen, that immediately becomes an acquisition problem, not a macro debate. The May catalyst matters because delivery attention changes behavior before the calendar forces delivery. Dealers tighten quotes. Large buyers stop assuming they can always refill tomorrow. Refiners and logistics desks start pricing time more aggressively. Traders who are comfortable holding a paper exposure suddenly care about whether the metal they might need is actually movable, convertible, and deliverable in the form their end buyer wants. This is where people get confused. They hear that there is plenty of silver in vaults somewhere and assume local availability must be easy. But vaulted metal that is not in your region, not in your preferred bar size, or not free to move on your timeline does not solve your problem as a buyer this month. For a real stacker, that is the difference between a normal premium and a replacement shock. That is also why the phrase plenty of silver can be dangerously vague. There can be silver in the system and still not enough silver where urgency is highest. There can be bars in one format while demand is strongest in another. There can be inventory that is technically present but economically sticky because moving it, converting it, financing it, or replacing it quickly is no longer cheap. Markets do not break all at once. They first become less convenient, then less flexible, then more expensive. By the time most people call it a shortage, the practical damage has already happened in premiums and delivery terms. If your goal is to add ounces before May, you care about the step before the headline. You care about when inconvenience turns into higher landed cost. Dubai matters because it is a real physical crossroads, not a random outlier. When a pricing signal shows up there, it is often telling you something about immediate demand, sourcing friction, and the willingness of buyers to pay for certainty. A screen quote is an abstraction. A buyer paying up in Dubai is a commitment. Money is leaving someone's account because the cheaper headline number is not getting the job done. That is why the Dubai number deserves attention even if you never plan to buy a bar there. It tells you how hard the market is having to work to locate and move silver when people actually want metal, and that tends to surface before the benchmark fully admits the strain. If you are stacking in the US or elsewhere, you still care because your local dealer's next restock is influenced by the same global replacement chain. And this is where the phrase two-price market stops sounding dramatic and starts sounding practical. One price is a reference, the other is a functionally executable price for metal that has to appear in the real world. As long as those two stay close, nobody cares. When they separate this much, somebody is either underestimating future tightness or overpaying for immediate certainty. Into May, the safer assumption for a stacker is not that the gap magically disappears. The safer assumption is that replacement cost can stay stubbornly high, even if the screen drifts sideways for a while. If your dealer is restocking from a tighter chain than the chart suggests, you do not buy at the chart, you buy at the dealer's next invoice. A lot of viewers hear that and think, fine, but is not every physical marker always above spot? Yes, and that is exactly why the size and persistence matter more than the existence. A $2 or $3 premium story is normal. An $18 regional dislocation story is different because it tells you the physical market is doing more than covering routine costs. It is rationing access. That is the midpoint turn in this whole setup. The story is no longer about whether silver has a premium. The story is whether silver is quietly developing a premium regime that the headline quote has not caught up to yet. Once you frame it that way, the screen stops looking like the full truth and starts looking like the lagging half of the truth. The second proof beat is what happens when this kind of gap meets dealer behavior. Dealers hedge off the benchmark, but they refill off the physical chain. If their next wholesale replacement quote comes in above where the futures screen says silver should be, retail pricing adjusts upward even if the chart has barely moved. Sometimes that shows up as higher premiums. Sometimes it shows up as delivery delays, product disappearances, or tighter limits on the products people actually want. The buyer experiences the squeeze through availability and restock cost first. So after every data-heavy conversation about Dubai, COMEX, LBMA, and nearby delivery, bring it back to the same question. What will your next ounce cost you to replace? That is the only version of the story that matters when you are deciding whether to wait. If this breakdown is useful, hit like now, because most silver coverage stops at the chart and never follows the metal into the physical chain where the real stress shows up. The chart is easy. The harder part is understanding why the same ounce starts behaving like two different products depending on place and timing. Once you see that, the whole maze setup looks different. You stop asking whether silver is cheap in theory and start asking whether silver is still cheap, where buyers actually have to settle. There is another mistake people make here. They assume a regional premium automatically means the benchmark is broken beyond repair. That is too simplistic. Benchmarks can still function while physical hubs detach for a time. What it does mean is that the benchmark is no longer sufficient by itself. If your goal is to acquire metal, COMEX can tell you the center of gravity. Dubai can tell you where the strain is surfacing. LBMA can still matter for wholesale references while a local market tells you the speed premium for metal that has to move now. Those things can coexist longer than most people expect. But they do not coexist harmlessly for stackers because every day the gap persists. Replacement behavior changes. Dealers become less generous. Buyers become less patient. The market starts rewarding people who secured ounces earlier and punishing people who assumed the quote on the screen was the quote they would actually get. A fair question is why arbitrage does not simply crush this gap immediately. If silver is silver, why not buy cheap in one place and sell expensive in another until the spread disappears? Because the spread is not just price, it is also time, bar form, logistics, financing, and certainty. The silver that hedges neatly on a screen is not automatically the silver that lands where a buyer needs it, when a buyer needs it in the exact format a buyer is paying for. Real arbitrage has frictions, and those frictions become expensive during tight windows. That is why a regional premium can persist longer than casual observers expect. For a stacker, that matters because persistent frictions translate straight into higher acquisition cost, even when the headline market still looks calm. So what would prove this is just noise. A fast collapse in the regional gap, easier delivery windows, and dealer quotes moving back toward ordinary premiums without product stress. That is what you should want to see if you think the market is fine. But if the gap holds into May, or if the headline quote stays soft while delivered metal remains stubbornly expensive, then the market is telling you something harder. The cheap number is the easy number, not the honest number. That is the credibility test. And if you want these physical premium updates before the next delivery wave, rather than after the rush hits, subscribe here, because this is exactly the kind of setup that looks boring until it suddenly reprices everybody's assumptions. Now let us make this personal, because this is where most videos stay vague. Say you plan to add 20 ounces this month. The difference between $73 and $91 silver is $360. That is meaningful, but survivable. Say you plan to add one 100-ounce bar. Now the difference is $1,800. Say your target was two 100-ounce bars, which is a very normal, serious stacker purchase when people think a quiet week will give them a better entry. At the screen price, that looks like $14,600 in metal. At the delivered Dubai-style price, it looks like $18,200 before any extra costs. That is a $3,600 gap created by one assumption that the benchmark quote and the replacement quote will stay close. Tell me in the comments whether you are buying 20 ounces, 100 ounces, or standing aside, because your answer changes how dangerous this gap really is for you. The same logic hits smaller buyers too, and that matters because smaller buyers are usually the ones most tempted to wait for a cleaner entry. If you are adding 10 ounces at a time, the spread is still $180. If you are trying to accumulate 1 kilo bars, the math stops feeling small very quickly. Even if your plan is slow accumulation, a market that keeps physical premiums elevated can quietly raise the total cost of your next 6 months of buying without ever giving you the dramatic chart breakout you expected to warn you. That is why replacement risk matters just as much to the patient buyer as it does to the aggressive one. You do not need to be a whale for a two-price market to reach into your wallet. The practical lesson is not to chase every high premium in panic. The practical lesson, if you are averaging in, this kind of dislocation argues for checking dealer restock cadence, not just spot. If you are waiting for a perfect dip, it argues for watching whether physical availability improves before assuming time is on your side. If you already hold metal, it argues for measuring value not only by the chart, but by what it would cost to replace your ounces today. That replacement lens is where a lot of stackers suddenly realize they were richer in real terms than the benchmark made them feel. The market can flatter you with a low spot price right up until you try to turn cash back into metal. Before May, there are a few signals worth watching without overcomplicating this. Watch whether regional physical quotes stay wide versus the headline screen. Watch whether dealers start extending shipping windows or nudging premiums higher on common products. Watch whether kilo bars and larger bars become easier or harder to source relative to smaller retail pieces. Watch whether every small dip in the benchmark gets absorbed without any real relief in delivered pricing. If those signals persist together, the two-price problem is not theoretical anymore. It is the market telling you that physical silver is tighter than the headline suggests. For a real stacker, that means delay has a cost even when the chart looks sleepy. There are really only a few ways this can develop into May. The healthiest path is that the regional premium cools, delivery anxiety fades, and physical pricing drifts back toward an ordinary spread over the benchmark. The harder path is that the benchmark stays tame while real-world quotes refuse to come in, which keeps punishing anyone trying to add size. The most aggressive path is that the benchmark finally starts chasing the physical market higher after weeks of pretending the stress was local and temporary. That last path is the one that catches late buyers off guard, because by then both spot and premiums are working against them at the same time. None of those paths require panic. They do require paying attention to the right market. So here is the answer to the question from the beginning. This is exactly why I opened with that contradiction. The answer is now clear for precious metals holders. Gee, Jijo Zol, silver can print one number on COMEX and clear at a much higher effective price in Dubai, because benchmark price discovery and immediate physical availability are related, not identical. When location, form, and timing all matter at once, the metal that can actually show up now earns a separate premium from the metal represented by the screen. Before May, that matters because delivery attention makes the market reveal where the strain really is. If the Dubai-style premium is the warning and the screen is the lagging confirmation, then the risk for stackers is not missing a chart move. It is waiting for a cheap quote that never translates into cheap metal. Keep your eyes on replacement cost, not just spot. And the whole silver story gets a lot harder to ignore. For a real stacker, May silver delivery attention pulls viewers toward real-world premium explanations, matters only if it changes what ounces cost, how fast physical pressure is building, and whether waiting gets more expensive. If you hold two, that is the part worth watching. A real stacker should leave, knowing where the premium is widening, what ounces really cost, and whether waiting is getting more expensive. If you want more silver coverage that follows real replacement cost instead of stopping at the chart, subscribe and stay close to the next delivery window update. And tell me in the comments whether your next buy is 20 ounces, 100 ounces, or two 100-ounce bars, because that one answer changes how you should read a two-price market